start recording. And then I'm going to share my screen. And you know that you all can, do you see the whole screen? Am I taking up your whole screen?
No, not for me.
Okay,
I like
great.
it that way.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, okay, good. But I am going to have to share my whole presentation.
Yeah.
Play from the start. Oh, good. And then I can still see you all in the corner. So that's perfect. And it's not quite 2:00 yet. So, yeah. See what's happening on Facebook. I got 5 on it. Oh, I'm going to put this on We Go Global too. We Go Global too. These people change the environment around them. Hello, Tanya. Hello, Maria.
Tanya. Hello, Maria.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, Google, stop Spotify. Google, stop Spotify.
I'm gonna.
I had you on mute, Tanya. What did you say? I had you on mute, Tanya. What did you say?
Oh, I just said I'm going to put myself on mute because I'm driving.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I want to make sure there's no echo. Somebody's in the chat. All right, let's get started. Becky, can you hear me? Please unmute yourself.
Yes.
Excellent. Dayanara, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. So we are going to just hop right in. Thank you. Hello, Sharmila. If you could please put yourself on mute. We are going to hop right into our podcast, Radical Self-Care with Beckie and Zoe, a WOCN Inc. podcast. So I want to start off by sharing the mission of the Women of Color Network. So our mission is to eliminate violence against all women and their communities by centralizing the voices, wellness, and leadership of women of color across the sovereign nations, the United States, and the U.S. territories. And we are so excited to be able to launch this podcast today. And the goal of this whole sort of healing and wellness platform, which is a new wellness platform and a new project of WOCN, is to center women of color advocates, activists, and talk about survivor health, healing, and leadership, their sustainability, and the broader social justice movements of anti-racism, anti-violence, and gender equality. So that is really one of the purposes of this new healing and wellness platform. And the purpose of this actual podcast is to really highlight some of the work that's being done nationally. We have so many national and international wellness experts, survivors of violence, be it state violence, domestic violence, sexual assault. We have so much knowledge out there about what people are doing to heal themselves and to heal their communities. And so we really wanted to highlight that, but we also want to get a sense of what people are already doing, how people are already doing the work of healing themselves. So we want to hear from national leaders, but we also want to hear from folks like every day. What are you doing every day? And so I want to introduce my co-host, Beckie Masaki. And Beckie co-founded one of the first violence against women programs in the nation that could meet the needs of language and cultural access for Asian survivors of domestic violence and trafficking, Asian Women's Shelter in San Francisco. She served as the founding executive director for over 20 years. Beckie has extensive experience in providing multilingual, multicultural services to domestic violence and trafficking survivors and their children. She is also known for creating innovative programming, and she's just an overall great, loving, wonderful spirit. And I'm so happy to work with her, not just on this platform and this project, but the other projects that I get to work with Beckie on. And then there's me. So I am coming to you all with 18 years of experience doing domestic violence work. And in this sort of, iteration of the purposes of us doing this today is that I started venturing into the world of healing and wellness quite a while ago, and do lots of work with organizations, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to talk too much about myself because this is about our guest. So I'm going to fast forward and we'll talk about how you can find us at the end of the call. Okay. So Beckie, I know that we talked about doing some sort of exercise to ground folks in the conversation. So I would love it if you would just say hey and take us through an exercise.
Okay. Yes. Hi, everybody. Hey. I thought that we could just do a short exercise of breathing and remembering to breathe, because I must confess, I'm not a great breather. I snore. I actually had asthma as a child, but also because of swimming or mindful breathing, I'm with us today and alive. And also I noticed, like, in our field and in our work, we often hold our breath, right? Like, okay, I got to get this done. Or, okay, I'm on, or these different things, and we don't do that mindful breathing. So let's just breathe. You can sit, you can stand if you're able. The main thing is let's breathe together, okay? So breathe in, breathe out. When we breathe in, we're breathing in abundance, breathing out to release any of our worries, fears, doubts. We're going to breathe in calm and breathe out a smile. I want us to try one more where we're actually, when we're breathing, we're going to, let's just do this together and try. Okay, so when we're breathing in abundance. And imagine that we're gathering all of the sparkles, the beautiful leaves floating in the air, stars, floating coins, anything that you just feel like would be gathering up and bringing in, and then pouring that into your head, your neck, your face, your shoulders, your heart, And imagine as you're breathing all of that in here, what you're pushing down below is all of the worries, doubts, fears, distractions. All of those things are getting in the way. Just push those all down. And that is all going down, down through our legs, through our toes. If you can reach, just even do that. And then at the end, we want to point our sword fingers. So that's like this, just point all the way down, and you're just guarding that and directing it down, down through the soles of your feet, through the floor. Right now, I'm on a second floor, so I'm imagining it going down to the first floor, into the ground, down to the foundation, below, where it is very deep in the ground and it can no longer linger around, surround us. All of our worries, doubts, and fears at this time are in the earth, where it's not going to hurt anybody. And instead, thinking about our ancestral tribal lands, it's going to be there, reclaimed, create fertile ground that something renewed, changes and growth can come. So one more breathe in, calm, and we're breathing out all of that worries, fears, distractions, and we're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Trying to put me in a little trance on a Friday. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, Beckie, do you want to just talk to us a little bit? I thought that you would be a great, because we really want this to be a conversation. So once Dayanara starts talking also, folks, I'm going to stop the PowerPoint. And we're just going to have a conversation so that I can really like see my co-hosts and really get into the conversation. But for now, I would love, Beckie, for you to just talk about radical self-care and what that means to you.
Right. Okay, radical self-care, that is a term that I learned or got from Norma Wong, who's actually here in this this building with me, but not on our webinar. But I think it's because when we thought about self-care, we thought it was selfish. And that we didn't want to do that. And all of us, I know every single person on this call, we've dedicated our lives to helping others in our family, in our work, in our social justice, deep commitments, and what we've dedicated our life to. So then the notion of self-care, oh, we don't have time for that, or that's selfish, or like, oh, no, that's not what I'm going to be doing. So when we use the term radical self-care, it's a reminder that yes, it is really looking at self-care in a radical way, meaning that it's revolutionary, that we need to do that so that we can take care of ourselves and center, and that's the only way that we're going to be able to care for others. So that is the terminology that when we're so proud of our work on the edges and in the field and in the front line, moving forward for others, that we must do that in a radical way of staying grounded and caring for ourselves. It brings us our best selves and our biggest strength. How about you, Zoe? What would you?
Yeah, so I love everything that you said. And as a matter of fact, that breathing was so good that I just want to add on to that. I just want us to breathe in actually everything that you said, because as you said earlier, so often we don't breathe, or we're walking around like, we're always holding our breath. Our shoulders are always up here. So I would love for us to just be conscious of our shoulders. What are our shoulders doing, right? And breathing in that good humpy, that good energy, that humpy that my co-maestra, Dr. G. Love, talks about so much, just breathing in all of sort of the good energy, the good juju, right? And just allowing that breath to create space in our neck, in our shoulders, all the way down to the ground. So for me, when I think about radical self-care, one of the things I think about is, so when I got introduced to self-care, it was more so about work and doing self-care so that you could do your job better. And so again, so much of this culture, really Western culture, is all about doing and so little about being. It's all about creating. It's all about what can you produce? Who can you be? What can, you're like a robot out here going from one thing to the next. And so for me, I've sort of changed my view about self-care in that, even though we're going to talk about organizational development on this call, for me, it's way bigger. It's even bigger than the word self-care. I know you and I kind of struggled with that too. We didn't even really want to call it, self-care, because in so many ways that word has just gotten so overused and tainted in ways that so many catchphrases do. Because it's so much more than that. It's really about trying to find a new way to be in the world. And so for me, that's what it's about. It's just a constant journey, a constant unearthing of, how can I just be in the world, irrespective of what I'm doing, right? So thinking about sort of what folks can do right now. So I just, in thinking about this call, I talk a lot about transition rituals. And so creating transition rituals for yourself, something that you do to take yourself from one state to another state. So perhaps a transition ritual for somebody is to get something, an essential oil, like a frankincense. Frankincense is a really nice purifier. I talk also a lot about lemongrass, which is a mood enhancer. So a nice transition ritual could be when you come home from work, you get yourself some essential oil, you put it in a diffuser, and that is your ritual. I also work a lot with bells, because bells can shift energy. So also just going around your house and just ringing bells in the corner can also be really amazing. Also something you can do, you can get yourself some sage or some, which I like better than sage now, Palo Santo. Palo Santo comes from the Amazon. It's a shamanic, it's actually a tree that grows like crazy in places like Ecuador. And so you can use that to purify the space, to purify yourself. And then affirmations. Affirmations are good to sort of work with the brain to shift your thinking. And so doing things repetitively are just things that I can think of right now. Becky, do you want to talk about a couple of things that folks can do right now?
Well, okay, breathing. And what I did today was the 10-step Tai Chi, right? And I noticed that sometimes I don't do it by myself, or sometimes I do actually when I'm in the most need. So during the time in my life when I was recovering from a near fatal accident, as I healed, and actually even physically and mentally, I was harmed. And then I was so determined to get well. So I did the 10-step Tai Chi every day. And it really brought back my breathing and my movement. And isn't it interesting? And what I'm noticing is now that I'm well and I feel well, I sometimes forget, or, oh, I'm too busy, or, I don't make it a regular practice. So I think that is something also for things that we could do right now, is just remembering, being grateful and thankful that when we are in a good space, or we don't have big worries, or maybe we do, but we still do it, right?
Yes.
Just a regular practice.
Thank you. And also it came to me, so I've been making a mixture of dandelion root and ashwagandha. And dandelion root is amazing because it helps to cleanse the liver. And one of the things that metaphysicians and even Asian medicine, acupuncture and things like that talk about, people hold anger in the liver. And so it's really nice to flush out the liver. So I've been doing dandelion root. So that's also something for folks. But now we're going to go back to that. We're going to have this question at the end because I really want to hear from Dayanara. And so Dayanara is going to talk to us about many things. And so Dr. Marte is a first-generation lesbian Dominican immigrant and mother of two who's dedicated to healing trauma and social justice. With over 20 years of experience, she's renowned for her extraordinary ability to identify the social, spiritual, and emotional impact that trauma has on women's ability to love, live, and lead, and as a consequence to the organizational trauma it creates if left untreated. So I felt like Dayanara had to be our first guest. I mean, I have had the benefit of training with her, and I've also had the benefit of sort of being on the other end of her trainings. So I'm just super excited to hear everything she's going to bless us with. So I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to you so you can talk to us about your work.
Oh my God, hi. You and Becky have been talking about self-care, and self-care for me is having you both, one, meeting Becky the other day. We didn't even know we were going to be on this call together, but like being in sisterhood and also in reverence of who Becky is in the world and her stand for, ending gender-based violence, right, all over the world and specifically in her community. And so that was a beautiful way to just even, garnish support to be on this call. And then with Zoe, who is my self-care, that's self-care, right? Like we need to have a sister or a sisterhood or a community, tribe, who is our self-care, right? It's not just about practices, but a sister who will mirror to you both your resiliency, your strength, and also your challenge, your trauma, your and can hold you to account for that. And so Zoe specifically has been calling me Dr. Marte because I'm like, listen, I don't know how to show and tell. I'm never going to say this to anybody. I don't know how to be on the front line. So, help me do that this spring. And so thank you so much for honoring that, Zoe, and putting that in the space. As I graduate in May, it's really helping me just show up for my graduation and be in the acknowledgement in the celebration, which oftentimes I don't know how to do, even though my job is to show up for us and for organizations to be able to shine. It's the one area of my life that I struggle with a lot. So, and that's the conversation today, right? The conversation is those contradictions, right? When we talk about radical self-care, the contradictions of how we are such a huge stand for our community, and there's so many things that we can do for others. And late at night in the dark, we're like, I don't know how to do this for myself, right? Like I'm out here, saving the world, but I cannot even fathom what that looks like, or where do I start with myself, right? And so I come to this work straight from the South Bronx in a nonprofit organization that was founded by some radical social workers, young Lord, Panther Party women, hardcore elders in the movement, who started kind of the first acupuncture alternative clinic in the South Bronx when there was a time around methadone and crack and, the burning and kind of the rising, right, of the South Bronx and wanting to be a part of that. And so I came into the conversation around healing justice specifically in this organization, where they kind of sat back and thought about what would an organization where women of color specifically can show up in their most powerful selves, what would that look like, right? What would it look like for us to reclaim our innate ability as women of color to regenerate, like the earth that sustains us, and where we can use all of our practices, and the healthcare system is not telling us that we're crazy if we say, you know, I waited till the last minute because I was burning sage, or I was praying, or I was eating chicken soup and, you know, using Vaseline for my aches and my pains. And so what would an organization look like where those who lead, who are also victims and survivors, can go through their own journey of healing while they also support the impact of oppression and social justice and trauma and neglect for the rest of our communities, and how that shows up in our mind, our body, and our spirit. So I come to this conversation from a seasonal model of healing, a deep connection to elders that have been doing this work for many years, and I have been able to translate that work into more specifically working with those of us doing the work on the front lines who are also victims and survivors of not just gender-based violence, but all violences, all isms, immigration, colonization, right? All of it. How do we do this work while we also take care of ourselves? And more importantly, how do our organizations have in place systems to hold accountability when our trauma starts showing up and it starts creating interpersonal dynamics within the organization, which oftentimes it's what kills our organizations, not the lack of funding. We know how to roll deep with a lack of funding. What we don't know how to roll deep with is when trauma shows up in our organizations, and now I need to kind of be harmed by my own sister when I'm already coming in with my own story of harm, of deep harm from someone else. Yeah. So I just want to pause so we can breathe kind of into that space. And I'm not sure, Becky and Zoe, if y'all have questions for me, like how do we want to do this? I can continue to talk, but do you all have questions based on what I said, or something that you really want me to zone into? And even, I guess, Zoe, you're monitoring the chat. So if people have questions, I just want to, like Becky said, be more comfortable.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't have any questions, and I would love to actually hear from folks in the room. If you have questions, comments, you want to add anything, you can just take yourself off mute and just join in the conversation, because this really is meant to be a conversation. And Dee, you said so many things about rolling deep and how, you can roll deep around sort of outside forces, but what do you do when those forces that come against you are from within? So that's definitely resonating. But I want to invite folks to join the conversation.
Well, I'll jump in. This is Becky with something I would like to have a conversation with you or ask Dee is, what are some practical examples, or like, what are things that you've done within the organization that kind of create or shift the culture?
That's a great question. Every organization is so different, right? Because we're talking about race and culture and ethnicity, and just even possibly not even having language sometimes for kind of what's transpiring. And so most of the times that I get called into organizations, it's because there's like a strategic plan we haven't completed. There's some staff that are being, passive aggressive, or some folks are not showing up, right, as empowering as they could be. There's some supervision dynamics, some power over stuff, right? Like people tend to take trauma, and the only language we have for it is organizational development. And so I get called in for some organizational development or program support work. And then when I go in, it's like, oh, we're all survivors. That's what's really happening. It's not about your strategic plan at all, right? It's about, how we relate to money. It's about how we are working in scarcity, or how we are in fear of success, how we don't trust each other. And not because any of us has done anything wrong, but because I just don't trust anybody. actually. That's my journey, right? Of minimizing that, because I probably will never trust anybody, but minimizing it to the point where I can work within a collective and a team and be held responsible for then the impact of that, right? And so once I start getting deep into the work, it becomes about undoing narratives and patterns, right? And mostly undoing narratives, right? And helping people really identify what's at the core of why they're showing up a certain way, or why the dynamics are showing up, and with who and why, right? Does this person represent your mom? Does this, this person's way of being with you, represent like someone having power over you? And so it's not necessarily their intention, but that's your experience. And so then you're coming off raw, or you are in total protection mode, or you're just trying to save yourself and survive maybe an organizational dynamic that might not have certain things in place, right? But because you already maybe lived in a house where they didn't have systems in place either, and you were dealing with stuff, then you're surviving this place in the same way, right? So practices would be undoing patterns, which is really hard, especially when someone is not even aware that they're a victim, or do not call themselves that, or feel like they've already healed from these things, right? And like, oh, this is just the way that I am, which you get a lot, like, this is just who I am. And so it's hard to kind of get into like, okay, I get that. That's who you are. And where did this come from, right? Like, you wasn't born this way. So something happened to get you to be this both amazing, beautiful self, and then also this way of being has a lot of impact. Are you hearing that, right? So then we develop a lot of listening, undoing listening for yourself, and undoing listening for the people around you, and then setting some real concrete communication practices. And I think you both started off talking about like self-care wasn't the word. And so for me, when I think about like ways of being, I'm thinking about accountability, right? Like, I cannot, one of the reasons I think our community is so tough around the word accountability, one is because it's been used against us in so many different ways, right? And so it comes really loaded, but also because if there is no agreement between people, we cannot hold accountability. Like, if I keep expecting you to show up a certain way, then I'm just holding you to my expectations. One, you're not aware of my expectations because they change every day based on my trauma. Two, I'm probably not in communication with you around what my expectations are. And so I'm holding you account in no context. We have made absolutely no agreement around how we're going to hold accountability, or what is it that we are holding accountability. So there has to be a lot of communication strategies put in place in the organization where I'm able to say, hey, Becky, there's a lot of things I don't know about, how I show up, right? So I want to kind of gift you and trust you with the power of letting me know some things that might show up because I don't have that awareness. There are some things, though, that I already do know that I come to the table with. So, Becky, I don't trust nobody, Spring is a tough season for me because I don't want to be born. My mama gave me up. So when you're like, let's go out and play, I'm like, hell no, it's not safe. I'm not going to do that, because I don't trust. And I'm also on a team with you, and I know we need to go out and play, right? And I know we need to do work together. So these are the things that I have in place to kind of manage some of my non-trusting. And my agreement with you, Becky, is if I say no, I'm not ready because I don't trust, help me breathe, teach me some Tai Chi, or here's a word that you can tell me that will shift me. And my agreement is to at least be in that practice with you until I get to the yes, right? So that when I don't show up like that, Becky, now you can say to me, hey, D, you said, right, that building team with me is that I can teach you some Tai Chi or some breathing so that you can get through kind of that original, you don't trust me, and we can go and we can do this work, right? Now we can hold each other to account, right? So for me, self-care is about practices with the intention that those practices will bring accountability to what we are creating collectively. That's a lot, but that's
yeah. No, that's so great. Thank you for what you were saying. And so then what I'm seeing is, well, a couple things is, as you were talking, I was really feeling that you are invoking Archbishop Desmond Tutu during the anti-apartheid movement when he said, justice demands three things: name the problem, healing, and changing the conditions so it never happens again. And when you were focusing on how we can do this in our organizations, I loved those examples and the way you were saying, like, yes, we're just boldly naming the problems or the issues or what's going on, right? The context. And then also we're finding ways to change the conditions or the way that we're doing things so that it accommodates, right? Or it works with, like, building our communication or deepening it, right? And those kinds of ways. But then also with a focus on the healing part, what are some of the things that we could create in the culture of our organizations or the practices that can really make space for and address the healing? And do you have any just examples of that or ideas?
Yes, and I want to preface with, obviously I'm speaking as if this is easy. This shit is not easy. Right? I went from, do this, Becky, tell me this. Like, that is not how that works, right? There's a lot of nuances in between to get to even being able to name and to trust and to be able to say, hey, Becky, you can do this, I'll listen, right? Like, so I just want to honor that it's not as easy as I'm saying it, right? There's a lot of nuances, but internally, right? This conversation is about spring, right? I want to contextualize with this in seasonal healing. So I want to say, before I give you some practices, that for me, I do kind of personal and organizational development with the seasons, with a practice of healing with the seasons. And so first, this is just a fantabulous way of us, especially those of us that join this call, it's already a commitment to your intentionality around what you're up to this spring, right?
Yes.
And this year. So thank you for being on the call. And so for me, the spring is about the heart. It's about self-love and our ability to love the planet. It's about the little girl or the inner child within each one of us. And thus, for me, each season offers a gift, a medicine of healing, and also an opportunity of healing. And the traumas that are invoked, especially for survivors this spring, sometimes with us knowing and sometimes not knowing, is any trauma that we've had in our mother's womb, any trauma that we're coming into this earth with that is intergenerational, kind of, any completion around that will show up. Things that have broken your heart along the way, as a young child that maybe we have still some incompletion around, will be very present. If we've experienced any form of sexual assault, sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, abandonment, neglect, this is the season of the little girl and the inner child who has a broken heart, right, for things that they had no control over. And it's the season of self-love because it's about getting back to being who we were before our heart was broken. And some of us might not even know what that is, because maybe it was broken way before we even came onto this earth, right? But it is the season that gives us the opportunity to go back even ancestrally to a place where our heart was not broken, and to remember, right, who we were and what are the practices that we need to put in place to get back to that space. And so the way that shows up kind of organizationally, right? So personally, I talked about like, you know, we don't trust, it's not safe for us, right? People are like, the return of the light, the return of the light. But for those of us that are like, too many things happened in the light, or like, I don't know what it feels like. I don't want to be seen. I'm afraid of what that looks like. I don't want to be loved, right? I'm afraid. I already know what being loved. It was very hurtful. The return of the light is actually not a good thing, you know? We rather just stay in the dark and be invisible. And then for those of us that things did happen in the dark, the return of the light is a safe space. It's like, oh my God, thank God, right? Somebody will see what is happening to me, right? So we hold that spectrum in the return of spring. And it's also a great time for us to give birth, not to just children, but for us to plant some seeds around what's next for us. Who are we going to be, right? What seeds do we need to plant to become who we need to become? And organizationally, it's a time when organizations are also kind of in program planning. What are we going to do this summer? We're launching new programs, right? But internally, some of the ways that the trauma might play out in our organizations is just people like having cliques and maybe some gossip happening, people throwing tantrums, not feeling loved or heard. People don't think that they're being seen for their work or that they're being affirmed. Maybe some codependent relationships might happen in some organizations right now because we're looking for our moms, we're looking for someone to take care of us. So a lot of caretaking starts happening. There's just a lot of different things to look forward to. I'm not going to go into it, but there's a lot of things that we can start kind of looking internally, organizationally, that you might start seeing that's happening. And it's just part of the seasonal process. And so we can put some things in place to kind of manage some of that as it shows up. And then some healing practices that we can put in place, maybe just even as prevention, right, is for everybody to really have a self-care action plan for themselves, right? Or even in your organization, what would it look like for you all to have a conversation of like, what did, your little girl or your inner child love to do? What are those snacks and stuff that you need to have around? What, are you taking a bath? Are you going out to play? What is going to have you be a little bit more self-expressed, right? Is there time and space in your organization for people to kind of feel sadness and feel some anger? And how do you create a space in your organization for people to feel that so that they're not expressing it in different ways? This is also the season of wearing pink. And so I'm really much into like being in alignment with the season, and pink for the heart and or green for the connection to the earth. And so you can have like rose quartz all over your organizations, on people's, desktops, right? Some beautiful affirmations all over the walls, like you are loved, you are affirmed, I see you, I hear you. Like how beautiful would it to be walking through your space and just seeing affirmations all over the place, right? And dress in your goddess, godly way. I'm a big fan of looking beautiful and feeling beautiful and wearing the colors of the season. And the element this season is earth, right? So making sure that like not all your staff meetings are inside, go outside, right? It's start having radical organizations too, where we're not just in these mainstream ways of doing things. So this is a time to have staff meetings outside, have lunches with each other, really start, bringing in some trust exercises, some more playfulness into the organization. This is definitely not a time to start punishing people. This is not a time to punish anyone in the organization or to make people feel wrong. It's a time of compassion and love, and to still hold accountability with love and compassion, right? For people to show up and do the work.
So thank you. You said so much. I've been just taking so many notes. Where to start? So one of the things when you were talking about the spring, I think about when you're coming out of wintertime, you're coming out of the holiday season. And for a lot of people, there's so much trauma that happens around the holidays. And so you're already in this place of sort of, on one hand, the messaging is you should be happy. It's the holidays. This is about family and this and that. But then there's always, for me, that underbelly of, yeah, but what if your abuser is sitting across from you at the Thanksgiving table and nobody has recognized that? And, oh, I have to spend Christmas with this person who is harmful and nobody in the family is talking about it. And so there is all of that sort, or even it doesn't have to be that dramatic. It could just be, I'm not happy and it's the holidays and I'm supposed to be. And then boom, here comes New Year's. And then it's like, oh, we're starting all over again. But you still are carrying all of that stuff sort of from the holidays into the wintertime. And then boom, here comes spring. And so it's also sort of the adrenaline and the energy and all of those things that leave our bodies from the holidays, because the holidays can be such a hype time. And so there's so many things happening. So even as you think about your proactive planning, thinking about, how you're going to go into winter, how you're going to go into spring, how you're going to go into fall. And so that was one of the reasons why we wanted to host this conversation, how we wanted to have this conversation seasonally. And we want to be very close to, we either want to be right behind the equinox or the solstices, or we want to be like a day or two before, right? Because we want to help to usher people into these seasons in a new way and reconnect us to the earth and reconnect us through sort of the energy of you talking about the heart. And so, yes, so one of the colors that's associated with the heart is green and pink. We talk about the green a lot, the pink a lot, but we don't talk about that the chakra color is actually green. So what can you do intentionally to, how can you use color therapy to lift your mood? Right, to be also in tune, and how could you encourage your staff to do that too, like in a way that, I don't know, because I can be kind of anti-joiner, but so I'm sure I would probably feel a way if somebody suggested this to me, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it. Like on Friday, we're all gonna wear green, like we're all going to, maybe bring in different foods and things like that represent the seasons, right? And so one of the things that we also want to do with this platform, in addition to this conversation, is actually put information out into the world about different recipes that you can do for the spring, different tinctures that you can do for the seasons, again, to get you through. Because when you talked about trust and having these conversations, you're a reflection for me as well. I mean, we talked, I don't know, it was yesterday or the day before, where I was like having a little bit of a challenge, right? Because of that, the retrograde also. It's so amazing how we're in this retrograde in spring, because the retrograde really is a time to go back and to revisit and to slow down. We get, this was kind of a tough retrograde, but typically for me, it's not, because it's the retrograde is usually just a time to slow down and a time to revisit and a time to do a check-in. The retrograde can actually be a gift. This one was just kind of hard, I think, because it was in Pisces, which is very emotional, and then going into Aries, which is like war. So it just was like a kind of challenging time, but yeah, just encouraging people to have these conversations about trust can be challenging, because many of us can, especially in communities of color, we could have come from families where there's just some things you just don't talk about. You get to talking about trauma and stuff, and they want to send you to another family. Okay, so I want, so Sharmila in the chat said, Yes. Okay. How can we call this out in our organizations, if not couched in organizational development or strategic planning or communications? So how can we call this out? And I also had a question about how trauma is allowed to flourish in our organizations versus in corporate America? Like, how do you feel that? So we'll answer her question first. So how do we call this out in our organizations if it's not couched in organizational development or strategic planning or communications planning more globally?
I guess the new word for it is healing justice, right? But it's always shifting and changing. I think that you would have to look at kind of your organizational culture, right? Like who your staff is, your clientele, their race, their ethnicity, their gender, right? All those amazing things that make us unique, but also our identities, right? So, and you want to name it something that is not re-traumatizing, right? So it can be another program that you instill and create. It should be a part of kind of your employee manual, right? You know, self-care has become something kind of on the side.
Yeah.
Right? Like, well, what are you practicing? What are you practicing? And so what I'm doing is supporting organizations and actually embedding this, grounding the whole organizational culture and system in the conversation of accountability. I'm not going to call it self-care. In the conversation of accountability, which includes a survivor-centered conversations. It includes self-care conversations. It includes health and well-being. It includes a deeper conversation of sustainability. It informs, right? We're saying we know our community. Your organization has to get to a place where it says we know that we are products of our community as staff. We know that our communities are dealing with X, Y, and Z, and then some, right? What we know, and therefore we know that we are all dealing with and have internalized capitalism, white supremacy, trauma, historical violence, institutional oppression. We know that. And so let's be proactive in putting things in place in this organization so that when we show up that way, because we will. It's not if and no, we will. What are the things that we have in place to manage that? And it includes accountability, it includes responsibility, it includes love, compassion, grace and peace and ease, but it includes that. And so it's almost a proactive conversation, and you can couch it in strategic planning. You can say our strategic planning will include conversations around, people are calling it being trauma informed, being survivor centered led, being gender equity. I mean, you can couch it in anything, but what you need to know is that really what you're saying is we have all internalized oppression. We are all victims of some form of oppression and trauma, and we know that that will play itself out. And so how is this organization going to have things in place to manage that as it shows up?
So do you feel that, because I think about that phrase, what is it? You can't heal in the same environment that harmed you. So if your environment is harmful and the people are disconnected from themselves, from everything, from the top to the bottom, can those people be trusted with a conversation like this? Because if you've already shown me as an employee where you are, how can I trust you to say, I'm going to show up this way? Because then when it comes time for write-up or whatever, sometimes that stuff can be used against you. So do you recommend bringing in an outside person such as yourself to lead that conversation?
You have to have an outside person. It can't be done with someone internally. And even if that is not the case, right? Like that we most of us work in cases that the organization has already been kind of a hurtful place, right? And using power over and stuff. But even if it's not that place, you want everyone in the organization to be a participant. Right? So this is not, just the ED or the ED bringing someone in just for staff, or staff just being like, my ED sucks, right? Or my supervisor, whoever. This is the whole organization needs to be a participant of it. So I would say you do need to bring someone in that is non-judgmental, right? That can hold all those pieces and also can hold a level of accountability, right? Like I love being with staff in a place where nobody trusts the ED because they think they're going to get punished. And I'm the only person who can tell the ED off for lack of a better word. And they're like, wow, you can do it. Like, we can't do that, you know? But I've already had a conversation with the ED and we already have an agreement that they need to model what they will be asking of their staff. And that's very important, right? So that management team or those in power need to have their own space to be able to then show up in a way to model to the rest of the organization what that would look like, right? So I'm not doing it in absence of, I'm not holding accountability in absence of that agreement, because I want to keep saying the word agreement. It is an agreement when we bring an outside facilitator or anyone else. It is an agreement that they will hold a space where trust does not live, where accountability has been used to harm. You know, they will hold all of those nuances and dynamics. And you know, a lot of people don't know how to do that. Mm-hmm.
And how long, so if an organization was going to bring you in, how long, does it depend on the organization? Like how long something like that would take?
No, I'm glad for the question, because originally I started just doing workshops. It doesn't work, right? Healing does not happen in a 1-hour workshop. It doesn't even happen on a 3-day retreat. Interpersonal dynamics do not shift that way. And so what I've been doing is actually working with organizations for the year. Mm-hmm. And even then, that year is uncovering, identifying patterns, uncovering, going through conflict. I still don't trust you. You didn't keep your agreement. Fuck you. You still punished me. I mean, it's the first year is all of that. All of that is being played out, right? Before you kind of get to a place of like, let's look at who you've been all year round, right? And and then we can do kind of a deep evaluation. But a year is a good time to go through deep, intense processes with organizations who are committed to the process.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yes, and I think that's so great, Dee. What you were describing is really so. Just interrupting that, it's just not a one-off. You know, I'm doing a training on this, and also in the example you gave, like, is really how you partnered, like very conscious of that outside-inside relationship. So very self-aware and conscious of you as an outsider, what bold things that you could say and do, but then in deep communication and interaction, right? And interconnection with the staff.
It's a lot of growth for me, right? Because, you know, in one organization, you can look at people in the face. In other organizations, you can't. In other organizations, accountability is something respectful. In other organizations, it's really not. If you're working with elders, there's just a way you need to do that. If you're working within a different race, right? So I'm always constant. There has to be agreement and communication, Becky, to kind of learn all those nuances, right? So that I don't become part of the problem also as a facilitator. And so, yeah, it's a lot of learning.
And I would love, so we have something from the chat that I want to bring into the room, but I also want to think about, and just take it to sort of just another level, because it's I'm hearing it, so I need to say it. Being an empath in the workplace. And what that means when you're a person who feels other people's energy. So I'm going to park that for a minute and read this, and then we'll come back. Okay. How do you think about self-care with an equity lens? If we have a multiracial team coming from different intersections of oppressions and experiences, some are direct survivors of violence and some are not. How do we approach care as a team that takes into account these differences? I would say bring you in, right? Hire you for a year. I mean, that's what.
Bring in, but also this, and me and Zoe are working on this, right? This requires a team of people, right? So I'm really good at certain parts of this. If we're doing this with multiracial, multi-gendered, multi-aged, multi-everything group, then those nuances need to be taken into account. So we're just not having a conversation, right? This is not just about a healing conversation. This is a conversation about gender, equity, race, sexism, classism, oppression, power, privilege. Like, I'm not just like, let's burn sage, right? Like, I'm not doing that. I can do an altar. I can talk about practices. I am talking about having deep personal conversations around power and privilege and classism. And I'm saying those three because they're oftentimes left out of healing justice conversations, especially classism. I'm talking about homophobia. I'm talking about transphobia. We are having deep, deep conversations to identify patterns and the nuances of us being even trauma. Though, we can all have the same story of sexual abuse, but maybe I was raped once and someone was raped for 5 years. All of those things are really different. And so you have to be able to hold all those conversations simultaneously in a space as you're doing healing justice work, right?
And I remember we were having this conversation sometime last year around, and I'm so glad you brought up class and altars, and because I feel like in this post lemonade world, so many people have hopped on like the Yemaya Sage bandwagon, which is great. We're glad you're here. But it's so much more than that. And when you talk about class and things that we take for granted, oh, I'm going to go do this yoga class. Oh, I'm going to get this. Remember, we were having this conversation. Like, what if you can't afford that? Yeah. So what does that mean? So you don't get self-care because you can't afford a yoga class. You know what I mean? We were having that conversation. So even within sort of this self-care thing, that class thing is real.
And appropriation, right? So I need to know what space I'm going into. What is your spirituality look? What is your conversation with religion? I mean, most of us have gotten hurt by religion and spirituality, right? And so these are deep, deep conversations where I constantly, and which is why I say Zoe was my self-care. In order for me to do this work and show up, I have to constantly check with myself. What have I internalized? Where's my discrimination? Where's my stereotype? How do I feel about trans people, white people? What's my classism? Have I had this conversation with myself? What's my incompletions around my own trauma? What am I still working? Do I believe in sage? I don't, and if I walk into someone who is an organization who is doing kind of culturally specific work from a whole different culture, I need to be ready to participate in that and honor that and put my opinions and judgment and biases away, because self-care also looks very different for people, right? And it doesn't look like practices at all or rituals.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean it's not self-care, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a deep conversation of access, of appropriation. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that goes into this conversation, but most importantly, for those of us that are a stand for this and are doing this work, who are on this call, it is a constant self-evaluation journey. It is a constant self-evaluation journey to be able to do the work that we do, no matter how you're approaching it, right? So what things do you have in place? What community, what practices? Because people are throwing around self-love, and self-love is the hardest, most impactful, devastating, lonely ass journeys you can ever go through on this.
Facts.
I don't emphasize that at all.
That's why nobody wants to do it.
I wanted to add to that. This is Beckie. Is yes, and it is also like reclaiming ourselves and our culture. So just small examples like, Zoe, that was a great example that you gave around a yoga class. And say, for example, here in a dominant culture in the US, they might think of that as, a luxury, or, or I'm an expert in yoga. And people who are born and raised in yoga as just a daily practice and part of a spirituality and religion, then it's a different way to think about that. I know for myself, I was born and raised Buddhist in the Japanese Honganji era of or aspect of Buddhism here. But in California, where I was born and raised, when more of the dominant culture is discovering or getting into Zen Buddhism and other things, there's a lot of wonderful wisdom. That's with all people. You can, you can be new into a religion or a practice and just respect its roots and go from there and make it your own. Mm-hmm. But there's also, I think, in our society here in the dominant culture, there's that mistake of claiming and owning it, and so I feel like that is what we all, I think every single person on this call, it's like reclaiming and also just owning and evolving our own views, experience, practice, or our learnings and reconnection.
Yeah. And I think that's the benefit of, that's the benefit of this time, is that we can have these conversations on the computer, showing our faces and, with relatively little backlash to an extent. And I think that one of the things that you talked about, Dee, around the loneliness of the journey of self-care, and I think the necessity to really understand that it is an ongoing thing, and that you're constantly uncovering your own patterns. So that's going to happen within the organization. Things are going to continue to arise. And so what are some of the things that folks can do proactively to sort of plan for what's going to happen?
What can people do proactively? So I think we talked a little bit about this, right? Like putting some practices in place in the organization. It's springtime, right? But also, what's playing out in our organizations most of the times is the things that we don't know, right? And so the question more is not so much because we can't proactively put in place things we don't know, right? But if we have some agreements around, like maybe Zoe didn't chew ice that way before, and for those of you that don't see her, she's chewing ice.
Why are you trying to play me on the podcast?
I'm gonna make it simple, right? If you know that Zoe is someone who drinks water all the time, and all of a sudden now she's chewing ice all day long, and that's not even that she's something that she's become aware of, right? Then we, instead of me being like, oh my God, Zoe, every time I put ice in the refrigerator, you always take it, it's really starting to have some compassion for people and asking, so Zoe, I've noticed you're like you've always drank water. Now you're doing ice. What's up? What's up with the ice? Is it that it's spring and the light has come back? And, but it's an inquiry. What I'm trying to get at is it's time to start inquiring. It's time to, even in the midst, everything right now is a trigger warning. Everything is so harmful, so hurtful. And I get it. The world is just that place. And I want us to, in the midst of that, also get back to wanting to know, who are you? What makes you laugh? What makes you smile? What hurts? If you walk into the office today, hi, Becky, I don't know you, but, let me take 5 minutes to get to know Becky today, right? Not just, oh God, Becky came in late. What the fuck, right? Like, are we going to dock her pay? It's kind of like, well, why did Becky come in late today, right? So I do a lot of work around, do we know who's in the room? Do we know who is our staff? Beyond their resume, beyond the fact that they didn't show up or that they didn't complete their plan or whatever. It's just, who's this person, right? Based on the amount that they can share.
Yes.
Do we know who they are? And so I never work with anyone I can't sit with and know who they are.
Yes.
Even if it's outside that organization, I'm gonna be nosy.
Yes. Who are you? Why are you here?
Just for connection purposes, right?
Yes.
Asking all these personal things. Are you a survivor and stuff, right? Becky, I see you want to say something, right? We're not asking those nosy questions, but it's just a human connection again is going to be really important for healing in our communities.
Let's do Becky, and then we're going to open it up because this needs to be a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes.
we're not observers. We're all in this together.
Right. I just wanted to build on what Dee was saying and also interconnect to Priscilla's question. Thank you. That was so good about how we think about self-care with that equity lens, especially around the intersections of many oppressions. And so a story I was thinking about is when when we were talking about vicarious trauma, at Asian Women's Shelter, and I'm a third generation Sansei Japanese American, born and raised in California, and together with staff that are primarily immigrant and refugee. Well, they are all immigrant and refugee folks. And when we started first thinking about vicarious trauma, I was thinking about all of the personal trauma that we've experienced in our lifetimes, right? Which is, yes, true, because we're in the work of having a domestic violence, sexual assault work and working with survivors. And yes, and I noticed that all of my colleagues, they went right back when we talked about trauma-informed care, went right back to growing up in the hill tribes of Southeast Asia, in where the country, the indigenous roots were being uprooted, the walks that they had to do to escape the violence, and many of their families torn apart, all of that aspect when we talked about trauma. And I know that also, right? Dee and I were just right there with our feet on the lands of Tewa Women United and the indigenous folks here in North America. When we talked about trauma, they were talking about loss of land, loss of people, and just being grounded. So I feel like it's really being able to address the intersections of trauma, and what the sphere of trauma we're talking about when we say that. But also it's the intersections of the healing, right? So could be overwhelming when we see all the piles and the layers and all the kinds of traumas that we have from the legacy of our ancestors to the present moment and into our future. And yet, by naming that, we really are also giving that space and time for that really deeper healing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when we did that, so like, for example, in that example I shared, when I was like, oh yeah, that trauma, then we could just really build the way, just name the problem, address it, so people feel validated for their journey of their trauma, and also validated in remembering how they survived that we're really here, and who we thank of our ancestors, and also how we are here. So that made us even stronger in where we were standing together and going forward.
So I definitely want us to just, not those of us that are driving, but those of us that are able, if we could just for a moment put our feet firmly on the ground and just take a deep breath in together. And exhale. We've heard a lot. Let's take another deep breath in. Exhale. And just thinking about what we are willing to let go of, what we're willing to create space to release. Just taking another deep breath in and releasing it. Knowing, making the agreement that we might not have the answer right now, but Maybe it'll come to us tonight. Maybe it'll come to us in our dreams. Maybe it'll come to us tomorrow morning, about just allowing yourself to be curious about where you can create more space in your brain, where you can create more space in your heart, and where you can begin to release some things that you may have come into this call with. Maybe some of the things you've heard will allow you to create the space that you need. Okay. Just wanted to do that. And then shifting over to Nancy's comment, being sensitive to the various temperaments and histories, how can we encourage more and more collective service, collective healing? Individualism has been so overemphasized that we have learned to value healing in a solo fashion, when so many of us born of collective cultures really need others to heal. Yes, because trauma doesn't happen in a vacuum, and I don't believe that healing happens in a vacuum either. So how can we encourage more? And I would say I'm giving that question to Dayanara, to Becky, but anybody else on the call. Mm-hmm. You know, how can we be more collective service, collective healing oriented? Mm-hmm. We've got a little bit more than 15 minutes.
Can I just share a little anecdote?
Please.
So I recently had an experience where I discovered in myself something that I didn't realize that I was experiencing. So I went out, it was like a film screening of Free Solo, and I was just meeting with people that I'd never met before, and it happened to just be 3 of us. It was 2 other Asian self-identified men. And it was a really, really nice time to be together, and they happened to be very, I think they're rather like interesting, kind of like more sensitive guys, but I'm sort of used to experience that amongst a lot of Asian guys. So when I was spending time with them, I realized that I felt so much relief that I didn't feel like I had to assert myself. And we had this experience where someone said they didn't want to sit in front of the theater, and then the person who started buying the tickets for the movie bought tickets that were closer to the front, and we all realized, oh my gosh, it's gonna be closer to the front. But everybody was like, okay, we'll just go with it. And I laughed because in another scenario, I would have been so worried about being judged for not being assertive. And then just that self-reflection, I realized it's so interesting, my kind of natural inclination and what kind of environment just naturally supports me. And I never realized how tired I was to always to be assertive. And amongst my Asian girlfriends and coworkers, they say that I'm more assertive than most everybody else. But it's so funny that I realize it's not really a natural thing in me.
Thank you for that.
I know. Thank you. And what you also lifted up is your question. I mean, an answer or an example of your question is like, what happens when you do have a collective, right? Or a group versus solo. And because of that, how ironic also, like going to a movie about a solo climb and then doing that collectively and acting and responding in your community, right? In your trio.
And you also lifted up this who we've become, right, is in our identity is also part of our survival. So like, it's not necessarily, you're not this outspoken, what was the word that you used? Because I want to make sure I use your word. Assertive, right? You're not naturally, that's just not of you, right? But who we've become is what we've had to survive, right? And it's not natural. And that's part of the undoing, right? Of the undoing of the internalized oppression is what part of it is me and natural, and what part of it is survival that I've had to become to be who I am today or to survive in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was nice to hear you say I was among these men, but because they had this kind of emotionality, I could put down that guard. I didn't have to be like, I didn't have to show up so assertive, right? And that gave space for some level of collective healing to happen in that space.
Ashe.
Yeah.
I think that curiosity is important. Asking those questions of yourself, being curious. I also think asking for what you need is helpful. And That's all I'm going to say. Somebody else want to hop in here?
I mean, just even what's come up for people and what people are sitting with. Anything you don't agree with what we're saying, you can
okay. We like that.
One other thing, this is Becky again, that I just want to, I'll say quickly, but Nancy, this other aspect of what you asked was so deep around this about individualism has been so overemphasized that we learn to value healing in a solo fashion. And I know that that is also like an invitation for us to reclaim the some of the natural or organic or even refined that. So for example, when I started Asian Women's Shelter in the dominant domestic violence field, they're like, oh, how could you do too much? Like you always have two people going to things. And sometimes if it was about language, they could understand why there'd be more than one of us there. But really it was coming from this idea of a positive extended family, which is also just the way I grew up, right? And just a natural way of being. So it was a way, yes, sometimes you do things on solo, but a lot of times when you think about we, it is the collective we. And so I feel like that is part of really now I think people are starting to see, oh yeah, collective work, our collaboration, and just really knowing like each and every one of you on this call, we know about that. You have that inside of you in many different ways. And so I feel like it's an invitation to uncover that, right? And go that way.
I think it's so important too in this era of us work. I work from home. Dee, you work from home. Becky, I think you work from home too, right? And so our work is already siloed enough. I mean, doing this work can be very isolating. I have members of my family that still don't know what I do, and so it can be very isolating. And so I think about our strategic plan that we had that Becky led, that WOCN had back in November, where so many of us, we communicate via Zoom, we communicate via email, and how meaningful it was for us to be together for like a week. And I feel like it made all the difference in our organization because we were able to, like you said, Dee, we were able to get to know each other better. Some of us know each other better because we work together, we train together, right? But for those of us that never got to really see each other, it was transformative for us because it was like, oh, I'm laughing with you, I'm having fun with you. Like, I think it's just so important for us to be connected. Do you pronounce your name? Is it Taj? Tage? Tage. I see you took yourself off. You decided to show us your face. So I'm feeling like you want to say something.
I was gonna say something. Hey everyone. Sorry, I was not. There was just a lot going on in my office. That's why I was not showing myself before.
I love it.
But the comment that Dee made around that we become what we've survived is just like it resonates so much because I think what I've seen is like, there's always this reference of like the angry woman of color, like, oh, why she always got to be so angry, or people using the B word. But it is a matter of like without that space to like heal and be able to reconnect to our true authentic self, that we show up in these ways that's not necessarily natural to us, but it's our survival strategy. It's our game face, like going to like living in New York City and taking the train. I remember when I met one of my girlfriends in college who was from Michigan, she used to call me train face because she said, why you always look so hard, Tage? And I explained to her, like, I developed this face because I was attacked so many times on the train, or people just like doing like, just really like obscene stuff in the train. Like I had to just have this don't mess with me face. So I feel like that's what happens to us in our organizations. Like it's so hard to show up heart-centered and open because we've survived so much trauma that we show up with our game face and our trauma face and our like, who's going to mess with me today face. And it takes an intentional process to be able to like get back to that place of our openness and vulnerability and to unlearn those habitual ways of being. And with the And with the collective versus individualism piece, I feel like within our organizations and our movements, it's about undoing like white supremacist culture. Like we've all been indoctrinated in white supremacist and male supremacist culture. And until we actually undo that, like the individualism just takes over, because that's the paradigms we've stepped into. Although like in our homes or in our communities, in our sacred spaces, it's communal, you know, and everything and everyone in, you know, there's interdependence, and we all like show up in community and practice in different ways. Like it's, we get caught up in like upholding those systems, but I think it's a constant practice to disrupt white supremacist culture and male supremacist culture every step of the way, through the act of leading into our collective power and, you know, and practicing interdependence. And it's hard. It's hard because it's going up against the system, up against the dominant norm. But it's not really the only way we're going to thrive, because we can't keep, you know, surviving those systems. It's actually killing us. Like the work that I do right now is because for myself, I felt myself dying, and I saw other sisters just ending up in the hospital and broken because of the, you know, surviving these systems.
Ashe. Thank you so much. And I see that, Nancy, I see also, Elise, I see you took yourself off mute. I don't know if that means you want to say something, but we're going to go to Nancy Wong first, and then I'm going to swing back to you, Elise.
Sorry, thanks. Is it Tage?
Yes.
I just wanted to just piggyback off of that I have to sometimes really check in with myself and ask myself, okay, this whatever topic it is that I'm looking at, is it influenced by that, or is it something that is actually transcend race or certain boundaries? I know for a while that I was curious. So I work at Asian Women United of Minnesota, and I was curious if there were any Asian Americans that had any books about marriages and safe and healthy relationships, and how do you have like positive non-toxic relationships. And I realized I couldn't find any, and I'd only seen it in you know, like white authors, and every now and then I would find an African American that would write about it. And then it took a while before I realized, but it doesn't mean that there aren't people that are doing that. It's just we do it differently. It's not necessarily written in a book. And just because things are written in a book doesn't necessarily mean that's the only way or the best way. And so I really had to kind of step back and think about that and think, okay, there are some things that we consider to be legitimate and valuable and somehow expert, whereas actually that's limiting the way that I've been kind of seeing it. So I just am thinking a lot about those things, like what is good for our group, and what is it that we want to do in our organization. And we may look to outside resources and processes and approaches just to get an idea, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do it that way. And I think with our organization, we've basically abided by that, which I think has been really, really empowering.
Thank you. Elise, did you want to say something?
I was just going to piggyback. So,
I think
Dee.
For Elise, who maybe might want to say something, Elise.
Yeah, she's coming in.
I thought I
can hear you.
Hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I wanted to respond to Dee's invitation. She said, you know, if you disagree, can you say something too? So
excellent.
So I'm not sure so much as I disagree, but as much as I'd like to kind of challenge and have more conversation around the ideal of the survivor strategies, tactics, ways of being that we learn in order to live in this violent-filled world is not also a very natural way to be, that it's a natural way of survival. It may be a way of surviving, that also diminishes our health. I always like to use the scenario of swimming. So you drop somebody in the pool. Most people naturally do some version of treading water. It's just a natural way of trying to save themselves. But treading water is not swimming. And so if you got a long ways to go, treading water is not going to save you. Swimming can save you. But if you don't have swimming skills, then you're not going to make it. Treading water is just to help you survive for a limited amount of time. And so our survival skills that we develop as survivors of both childhood trauma, living a life constantly full of oppression, direct personal oppression as women of color, and then those of us who are unfortunate to work in mainstream organizations who then deal with that specific kind of oppression while we're trying to do loving, caring, graceful work. So we're being bombarded every day with all types of different violence and oppression. And so we are trying to survive in this muddy water, heavy, thick, muddy water that's, trying to pull us down. And so I just wonder if when we talk about our survival tactics and strategies, and maybe those are two natural ways of being. They're natural ways of surviving. They're not the best way of living, but certainly I'd like to talk about them and think about them, the possibilities of us, rather than rejecting who we are in order to be and live and survive, to embrace and recognize that, hey, I'm still good. I'm still magnificent and wonderful. And these are the ways in which I survive, but I know that I can be better without putting the negativity on who I am at the time of, at the now, in my survival mode. And I think we also always have to go back and forth to survival mode. I mean, as women of color, I think we will always, till the day we take our last breath, we will always have to pull out of our bag of tricks, survival strategies and tactics, because the world is never going to be a safe, loving, caring, affirming, celebrating place for us.
Oh,
and
I hope that's not true. I'm going to have to cancel that. Okay? I'm going to have to reject that. I love you, sister.
Cancel and delete. Cancel and delete.
That's not the world I want to live in.
Yeah. So the reality is in our lives, we always, the way survival strategies don't have to be our main way of living. We certainly want to learn a more graceful, self-loving, affirming way, happier way of living. But I just feel like we still got to keep that bag of tricks, because day to day, throughout the day, I'm going to have to pull them out.
Mm-hmm.
I love that bag of tricks. I love that. To my color girl bag of tricks to get through this situation. I love that. Mm-hmm. So we have 2 minutes left. I'm not sure what happened to Dee's connection. She froze for a minute, and so she might be having a problem getting back on. But again, I want to be respectful of y'all's time. So we have 2 minutes left. So any other comments? I have put our next call in the chat. And so our next call is on June 25th. So much love and gratitude to you all. Have to jump off early. Thanks for filling my cup on a day where I am in a place of listening. Ashe on that. Thank you, Maria. That was from our Maria. Any other comments? Questions?
Hey, Zoe, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Dee. I'm sorry, my computer's bugging, but I'm listening just through the phone.
Great. Oh, there you are. Perfect.
Okay, bye.
All right. So do you want to respond to what Elise was saying around having space for the survival tactics at the same time?
Listen, Elise is my mentor. Don't be getting me in trouble. This is a small community. I have a team of people working on me so I can do this. And Elise is one of them. But I'm glad that Elise lifted it up. Priscilla, Tage, Nancy, that we do. The world is constantly creating us. And our task is to not let the world create us, but for us to create our world as the world is also creating us. Okay. And that we, the one thing that we can count on is the inner child in all of us, the adolescent, the young sister, who has lived here before, all of those. allies that live within us, they have our back. They will always be our default. They will step in warrior mode in 5.5 seconds. They will always be here, and they have learned how to survive this world. And so, yes, we do have a default. We need to have a bag of colored girl tricks with us to be able to pass and walk through all these institutions day in and day out. And Tage needs to have her face on the train. I need to puff up, right? Like, we need all of it. And we also need a moment when we let it all go. Because it can kill us. And so we just need a respite during the day where we're like, great, survived this day, pulled out all of my tricks. Now let me go back to being me. Yeah. And who am I? Because I'm not the bag of tricks. They're just a bag of tricks. I'm not that. And I think that Tage brought it up, you know, we're dying. We're dying. If we continue to become the bag of tricks, we are going to die. If we hold that face if we hold that face at home, and if we don't know how to just hold it on the train, but we bring it home and we raise our children with it, and we have sex with it, and we love partners with it, we're going to die. If we love ourselves with it, we are not the train. Our families, you know, the people we love the most, right? Who have not been harmful, you know, we don't need to have those bag of tricks with ourselves and with others. And so I think we just need a space to be able to put it down. Yeah. So that we can reclaim our minds, our bodies, our spirits, so that we don't internalize it to the point where we are developing all types of dis-ease, because they are banking on capitalism killing us, so they don't have to. And facts. And and so that's what I leave us with, right? Yes. A bag of tricks, make sure they're there. Be safe in surviving the world. We're living in some crazy times, but probably not crazier if we speak to our elders in those times, right? Because every generation has a crazy time, and but have a moment of respite so capitalism doesn't kill us.
Shay, and thank you so much. And so let's just breathe that in for a moment, just around she who's lived before and the little girl inside of us. Let's just breathe into that space for a moment. And hold space for all of that. And I just want to thank you all, for my colleagues in particular who are on the call. We are in the middle of grant season, and so infinite gratitude for you all to just take the time to be on this call. Samaya, Elise, Tanya.
Hey, can I say something?
I was surprised you wasn't crying. I saw your face tooting up. I was like, oh, Tanya's gonna cry.
That's because she's crying.
I saw your face. I was like, oh Lord, she's holding her neck. She's gonna cry.
You know what? I scarcely get through conversations with any of the women on this call without crying in one piece. So you're right, but I'm driving, so that's the deal. That's what's happening. I don't have anything to say other than this really is my dream group of people on this call. And I'm so blessed to see, you know, all the folks, Dee, Becky, to hear Elisa's voice, to also, you know, connect up with new folks who, like Nancy Wong and Taj and others who are on this call. I'm just so excited. I just wanted to tell you all, I'm looking forward to the season. I'm so grateful to be able to be on these.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Tanya's our CEO, our boss lady, rocking her pink for the seasons as well. So
I know.
Representing. And so, so our next call is June 25th. We are going to have my homegirl, Yolanda Farrell from Florida. She's going to talk to us about meditation. She's like a meditation guru. And so she's going to be talking to us about that. We also have an amazing wellness survey that the WOCN team and our evaluator has been working on. And so we are going to be releasing that survey probably, if not like tonight, not like next week, because we want to know what people are doing around self-care, how they're feeling, how they're surviving, how they're thriving. So we're going to be sending that out to you all. If you are not following us on Twitter. I don't know why. I don't know what y'all doing, but at WOCN Network on the Twitter, and Women of Color Network Inc. on Facebook. Dayanara, how can people get in touch with you? I put your link to your company in the chat, but how can folks get in touch with you?
Yeah, on Facebook, just my name. I made it real easy for people. Just my name, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and also at InBold Rebirth at Gmail. So just InBold Rebirth at Gmail. So thank you, all of you, for having me on. I'm so excited to have helped you and Becky launch this day and to be a part of this group. And here's a toast, everybody, to your bold rebirth this spring.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
I wanted to also say my goodbyes and appreciation with this Japanese proverb, Ku areba raku ari. Through harsh winters follows spring.
Thank you. I love you all. I hope to see you all soon. This call was recorded, and so it will be downloaded. Hello, Priscilla. Thank you for joining us back with your beautiful face. This will be recorded, so I'm going to download it now, and then it'll be on the WOCN Facebook page, Twitter page, and our LinkedIn. Okay, and so we're easy to find. So reach out to us with any questions, comments, anything that pops up afterwards. Find us. We out here.
Yeah.
Bye.
Love y'all. Bye.